Welcome to the Teaching Journeys podcast, hosted by Dave Roberts. Humanity possesses a unique skill, the ability to pass knowledge from one generation to the next. This podcast embraces that ability, offering learning opportunities through conversations with extraordinary guests. Dave aims to leave a positive mark on individuals around the world. So before you dive into today's episode, please share this podcast with your network, including friends, family, and colleagues. And please consider leaving a rating or review. Your support makes all the difference.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Teaching Journeys Podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, and today it is my pleasure to have as my guest, Cindy Berg. Cindy is a dynamic and internationally acclaimed motivational speaker, retreat leader, licensed psychotherapist, and published author. After a series of devastating life experiences, her existence was completely splintered. Through Cindy's own grief and healing process, she has experienced extraordinary conversations and sides from the other side, confirming that those who have passed are still with us. She shares these experiences with local and international audiences in the hope that her journey will provide hope and inspiration for others moving through the grieving process. Cindy, welcome to the Teaching Journeys Podcast. It's a pleasure having you on the program today.
Thank you so much, Dave. It's a pleasure for me to be here, and thank you for allowing me to be able to share this hopefully for so many people who have possibly gone through this as well as losing a loved one. So a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And it's a pleasure to have you here. And I know we met, I think, on Facebook. We've been Facebook friends for a long time.
Yeah.
I think our paths might have crossed intermittently at some Compassionate Friends conferences, but the stars aligned and you reached out to me, and we're here on a actually beautiful Sunday morning where I'm at, sharing coffee and doing a podcast. So,
well, it's amazing how people meet. There's sort of the irony of it's meant to happen, right? So, and I'm hoping that it can also help other people on this podcast to understand that they're never really alone, even after they lose their loved ones.
I've learned in my own journey that no, we are not alone. The survival of consciousness is real. And I know when you begin to share aspects of your stories today, that's going to give my audience, future food for thought.
Very much so. And, let's get started. Do you want to ask me questions or?
Absolutely.
Okay, take your time.
All right. First of all, tell our listeners about the experience or experiences that have shaped your life path and your life passions today.
Well, I'm going to just start off when I was a young girl. My parents had a wonderful marriage and they were very much in love. And my older brother was about 16 months older than I was. So we were going on vacation, my family, and my father was driving. It was in the early evening in New Hampshire, heading off to Maine. And it was a very two white lane situation where one car would come up and we would go the other way. And all of a sudden, I remember this so vividly that this car came on the other side, and he must have fallen asleep. He was a young boy, being young male, ready to get married in 2 weeks. And I guess we assumed that he fell asleep at the wheel and the foot hit the accelerator, and he was by 120 miles an hour. And my father saw this happen, and he pulled over as much as he could because it was coming a bit toward him. And he knew that he was worried because my older brother and myself were in the back. My mother was expecting a third child. She was in the front. And my father took the brunt of the accident. And unfortunately, he died. And we also had a dog in our car. She was a wonderful boxer. Her name was Bernice Zazu. We call her Beezy. And she just adored my father because he grew up in the Bronx and he couldn't have a dog. And he always wanted to be able to mow the lawn and have a dog. And so she was shot by a state trooper because she was in so much pain. And that's where it all started. I completely had no view of what this would look like, because I was literally lifted out of my body and I was above the car, as was my father. And we walked slowly into this beautiful, beautiful space. I can't even describe it. It was like, as they say, heaven. But like it was like heaven reborn. It was absolutely stunningly beautiful. I saw so many dogs that I had over the years. I saw some relatives who I kind of knew but didn't know. Everybody was so embracing and loving, and I didn't want to go back. I did not want to go back. And my father turned around and he looked at me, and I knew that he had died and I had died. So he turned around and goes, you can't stay here. You're not ready to come here. And I told him, it was almost like a mental telepathic kind of conversation, which is hard for me to describe instead of like you and I talking back and forth, Dave. And he looked at me again and he said sternly, he goes, Dad, I don't want to go. I don't want to go. And he goes, I love you, but you need to go back now. And boom, I remember being forced back into my body and I was unconscious for like 4 hours. And I wound up at Massachusetts General Hospital. We were in the midst of bypassing Mass and then going into Rhode Island. So they medvaced us because they said it was the worst atrocity they've ever seen. Our car was like an accordion. I believe I was sitting behind my father in the back seat and my brother was next to me. I don't even know how we even survived. However, I wound up in a hospital at Massachusetts General Hospital for 3 months. I was told I'd never walk again or I'd never be able to have children. Well, 3 months later, I walked out of that hospital and I wound up doing track and becoming an athlete. So all the things we say we're not able to do, it's a miracle that things can happen. But I will tell you this, it's just changed the trajectory of my life and everybody's life. And we can't take things for granted. And being on that other side is one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen. So for those of you people who fear death and dying, which a lot of people do, our culture should talk about it more, is the fact that we are never alone. And wherever we go and when it's our time, I do believe we take contracts. That's what I've learned being all over there. I don't, some people will ask me, like maybe you, Dave, you would say, well, Cindy, why would a person want to die so young? Right. Or all of that. We made a choice. That's what I've learned, that we do have contracts. Some people live long lives and some people don't, but that's where it all started.
Yeah. And, as I was listening, it sounds like not only you had a near-death experience, but also a shared death experience, is that you were able to
Yes.
get out of your body, escort your dad to the portal that was going to lead to eternal bliss for him. He was told, it's not your time. You can't come with me. You have more work to do. And what you've described is very consistent with near-death experiences that other individuals have described, the same features. Being told that it wasn't their time to go back, going from a dark tunnel to lightness. And I mean, IANS, the International Association of Near-Death Studies, they documented the first near-death experience in the late 1800s.
Right? Yeah.
And the question is, and this goes to my audience, if you're questioning whether near-death experiences are real, there has been so much documentation through interviews over the years, so many consistent features that have been documented across centuries, that there's no question that near-death experiences are a phenomenon. If you look at Eben Alexander, who is as science-based as you can get, a neurosurgeon, he got a glimpse of the afterlife and wrote a book about it. And he tried to use science to disprove that what he had was a near-death experience, and he couldn't find any scientific explanation for brain function that could account for the experience that he had, based on the fact that his brain was fully involved with infection. So these are real, and I would encourage any audience, my audience, is that before they debunk it, take a look at the research and then decide for yourself where your truth lies.
And I think that's so beautifully said, Dave. You're so right on and spot on with that. I think a lot of in our culture, we need to talk more about death and dying. It's just another transition to another place. And I think it scares a lot of people. And I mean, I would never wish anybody getting into a horrific car accident or being hurt or anything like that. But there is something to be said for the fact that we are never going to be alone. We will we will see our loved ones. But I also learned being on the other side, as much as it seemed like it was hours for me, it was like probably like 30 seconds. I saw so much, and that everybody is very loving and kind. I even saw all my dogs who had passed on. But there was something very beautiful about it. I really didn't want to come back. I was so inundated with such love and kindness, and us humans really need to work on that a little bit more. I've never been afraid of death and dying. I know that I'll see my loved ones, but I also, when I was up there, I knew that we still had to do work, right? And that's part of that. The what's the word I'm looking for? That's part of what we decided that we took. They said, we coming in here, and I knew if I was going to have a car accident, it's very possible that I would have already known that, but not have known until it happened. Yeah.
Yeah, it's obvious the trajectory of your life has changed, and I'm sure that's come out in your everyday life. So tell the audience specifically, this happened when you were about 12 years old, am
I
I
was
correct?
12 old, soon to be 13, and my brother was almost 15 at that time. So how it worked, and I don't mean to interrupt you, Dave, at all, that when we went into Massachusetts General Hospital, we were on the intensive care ward for young kids, right? So it was four boys in one room, four boys, four girls in one room. It was like boy, girls, boy, girls. We were all in the same room. My brother was in a coma for 2 weeks, and he didn't wake up until then. And then he realized we were in a hospital and he didn't know where I was. And that was upsetting for him. But one of the nurses said, your sister is in the other room, because it was boys, girls, boys, girls. He would come in with me, Dave. He would come into my room and sit with me for hours because I was somebody tangible. He was so confused because he got hit in the head really hard, apparently. He doesn't have any brain damage by the grace of God. And this is another miracle, right? He could have had brain damage for the rest of his life. But he would sit with me for hours on end, and the first thing he asked me, it took him a while, and I knew it was coming because my father was very close to my brother as well. He goes, well, where is Dad? And there was a dead silence, and I knew it was going to devastate him because I was the first one to find out that my father had died. And my mother was also in intensive care, and she was actually in a different ward, but I'll explain that later. And I looked at him, and I was really so worried because they were so close. I go, I'm so sorry, Michael, but Dad died. He died in the car accident. And it still makes me cry after all these years. And literally, he looked at me, he walked away, and he sat and he fell asleep. He went into his room and he didn't come out for like weeks.
Now, Michael, as I recall, was he your older brother?
Yes, he's my older brother. Unfortunately, my older brother was murdered many years thereafter for not having, it was a home invasion. He did nothing. And I think that, and that was years later. I think for my mother, she could never survive after that. And that was another whole part of our life, right?
Yeah, as somebody who has lost a child, and for somebody like yourself who's lost a sibling, those are life-altering, devastating losses because as a parent, I never expected I'd be coming into this world, or part of my soul contract would be carrying the legacy of my 18-year-old child
Yeah.
when she was supposed to carry it for me. And the same with siblings. I mean, you know, I can imagine you didn't even come into this world imagining you'd be burying your older brother.
No.
And
But but
and
but Dave, what was so ironic about that is that I remember him sitting down with me. This is after our car accident years later. He looks at me. He was visiting me on the Cape, and he was living in New York City at that time. He goes, "Hey, I'm going to come down for a visit." Yeah, come stay with me. He goes, Cindy. He looks at me so nonchalantly, but with purpose. He goes, I'm going to die young. I know it. I just know. I don't know how, but I'm going to die young. 3 weeks later, he was murdered.
and I think that happens more often than we know.
Oh,
I've said this on other podcasts that my daughter died or transitioned from the physical world, as I call it, to the spiritual world, um, of cancer. And 2 years before, she had asked my wife, "What is it like to have cancer?" Before she even got diagnosed, before she even got sick. And there was other validations that I think she knew that her contract was to be on this earth for a specific amount of time. That was the amount of time that her soul needed to grow and develop. And then she moved on to her next existence, but she continues to show me that love exists from the other side. And, after years of working with, just my own research, working with some other very influential individuals in my life, I've learned that that's all she needed, but that our consciousness does definitely survive and we can connect with it and they can connect with us anytime they feel the need to.
yeah. I'm very sorry about your loss, David. I don't think we ever get over it. We just have to learn how to walk with it. And I think that's the hard part. But I will tell you this. I have seen my brother 3 times having a conversation after his death. And I remember there were many moments. I eventually moved my girls and I down to Florida because I had an opportunity for a job opportunity. I was only down there 3 years, many years ago. And I remember just getting into this house that I owned. I bought a house down there and we just had to do it because it was my work schedule, even though I would be back up to New York State or Massachusetts at a different time. But I remember sobbing over his death, even though it was already a year. I was a year ahead of it. And my kids were sound asleep. They were very, very young at that time. And all of a sudden, and I'm talking like sobbing, I'm sure you've gone through this as well, Dave. You can't, it's like this primordial crying that you can't stop. And it's coming out of just intense sadness and loss. And he appears to me in his blue suit. We buried him in his blue suit. That was his favorite suit. And as I'm lying down, I see this swirl of white light slowly, slowly, slowly coming in. And my brother was there and he always called me Sin, C-I-N, as opposed to Cindy. He goes, "Hi, Sin, I'm here." He goes, "I don't want you to mourn me. I don't want you to mourn me at all. I am doing fine. I'm with Dad and we are doing fine. And I love you." Now, what I thought was literally like a half-hour conversation, it was probably like 3 minutes because they can't stay long. They have to go back. And I thought it was an eternity. It literally changed the entire trajectory once again of my life because I never felt sad again because I knew he was around. I knew I could talk to him. But when he said, "Cindy, I have to go now. It's really important. I have to go back." So he looks back at me. He had this most beautiful smile and he goes, "I love you and I will see you again." And then I saw him walk back into the ethers.
Yep.
It changed everything for me. Everything.
Yeah. And yeah, that would change everything for me too. Just knowing that we continue to go on in another dimension, in another form, in another form of energy, and that basically the soul is eternal in the process.
But then if
And
we come back, Dave, I don't know how much more we're gonna have to learn again, right? With
uh,
more, like,
well, and I think, I've learned through reading Brian Weiss's work
oh,
that
yeah,
the soul has free will to incarnate into the physical experience, to gain more knowledge, to gain more of those experiences that are going to be good for the evolution of the soul, or they have the option just to stay in eternal bliss in spirit. So as the humans have free will, the soul has free will.
yeah. I'm just curious, if you wanted to come back, would you, Dave?
I could give you a smug answer and say that I'll know when I get there.
Okay.
But at the same time, if there was an opportunity for my soul to continue to grow and evolve, I would jump on that. And I think I would sit down with my spiritual advisors or counsel and say, okay, let's contract for the next experience. Let's take a look at how many ever past lives I've had. Let's see what's unresolved from those past lives. Let's see what experiences I still need to grow my soul, and we'll go from there. So yeah, I mean, if there was some more opportunity for growth and my soul could see that, I'd come back.
That's really, really quite beautiful. And one of just, and you may very well, and maybe we will meet again, but hopefully not for a good while, right? That we still have a lot of years left. But as I get older, I start to look at more of my mortality, even though I still look at my living and how important it is to live. But it sort of changes the perspective of what's important, right? For anybody at our age and up, or anybody for that matter. But it was very interesting you said that because I used to belong to a spiritualist church for quite a many years, and there was a woman called Irene Harding, and she was an incredible, not only a pastor, but an incredible medium. And this was years ago, and she passed away a year ago. She was in her 90s. And I remember she pulled me aside. This was a Sunday. This was quite a while back. My kids were very young at that time, and they would go. They actually loved this sermon. It was a lot of fun for them. She went up to me and she goes, "Cindy, I need to tell you, if you choose to come back, you are going to be in highest circus." And I wasn't sure I wanted to hear that because, like, I've worked hard, I've helped with people, and I was tired when she said that. She goes, "I'm telling you right now, if you choose to come back, you will be of highest service." And I'm still, after all those years she said that to me, I'm not even sure what I would be doing, right? But there's, like you said, on the other side, we still have a lot more to do, and we can choose to come back if we want to. But that would be a choice that we can make ourselves, right?
Mm.
But it kinda threw me off a little because I've always worked so hard and taken care of people. I'm thinking, "Do I wanna come back?" Right? And I can't answer that. And I just hope that people know that their loved ones are very much with them, and I think that's the hard part for people who have lost. especially children or anybody they've loved. You know,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that segues into my next question about your book,
Sure.
But the Heavens Never Cried. So, what inspired the writing of your book? And tell our audience what you want them to take away from it.
I think I was in such despair over the death of my brother. I would stay up till 3 in the morning. I would just write, 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 write. It's really about how everything has happened from the day that my brother and I were together. He was murdered, and basically how that happened, it had nothing to do with him. He was living in Lynn, Massachusetts, facing the water, and there's an old saying for Lynn, Mass, it's Lynn, Lynn, city of sin, because there's a lot of crime in that city, and I hope that has changed. But he was in a beautiful Victorian overlooking the water, and, I had talked to him that night, and I said, "Okay, hopefully we'll get together next week, and I love you, and I'll see you soon." Because I was in Boston. I was living in Boston at that time. And then I get a phone call that morning, and it was my mother. My mother was screaming, and I couldn't make out who it was. I was in the kitchen in my house in Boston, and she got on the phone and she screamed, "Your brother was murdered." And it literally threw me off. I had that night before him to have a wonderful conversation and tell him that I loved him. He was I think he was what, 17 months older than I was. And I didn't even realize it was my mother and I slammed the phone down because it was so shocking, and my kids were, like, in shock, which they never should have heard either, and that started everything for me, and it just threw me, and that as a result of that, I wrote this book, and it was really about from 0 to the end of the book, all about his death and all the things we still need to learn, and it's a hard book to read because of the death of him, but my second book is just finished, and it's called something like Violets, 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 and What My Dead Brother Told Me, and I haven't gotten it out yet. It's done, I just need to do a few more things, and I'd like to get it published if I can, and I'm thinking, "Okay, let's see where it goes." So that's where it all started. I think writing that book helped me as well, my initial book.
Yeah, I imagine it had to be cathartic and also had to provide some more clarity to the clarity that you've already developed.
Yeah, and also it was just the book is really kind of brutal in some ways because there is a section that's how he was murdered and what happened, but, I had to put it down there, but I'd like to get it out if I could, as well as my second book. I need to finish up a little bit on the second book, but it's a lot. It's a lot for people to read. It can be painful, but it's very real. And sometimes I think we need to clear that of ourselves is to do something like that, right?
Mhm.
Or ritualize your loved one every year or every day, right?
Tell the audience your brother's name and how old was he when he died?
He was 39 years old when he passed away, and his name is Michael Barg, Barg.
Well, I always like to make sure that the names of our loved ones are mentioned during the podcast because that's how we remember.
Yeah, he was really a beautiful soul. I'm probably a little biased, but he knew he was going to die young. He just knew it. He would talk about it, and it was hard for me to hear that. I don't think he ever knew how he was going to die, but he knew he was going to die young.
Yeah, and again, we talked about that earlier. My daughter had the same premonition, and again, it's just something that I think happens more often than we even know. In your, I know you're a therapist,
Yeah.
so there's a two-part question for this. First, do you deal with a lot of individuals whose loved ones have died by murder, very similar to Michael?
Yeah, I have, unfortunately. But what I want to share, and I'm going to share this with you, is that he was living in this beautiful Victorian apartment. There was a woman across the way. This woman was dating this married man who was crazy, like you wouldn't believe. He always thought that they had an affair together, which they didn't at all. He was going to law school, my brother, and this woman was just, I don't know, probably not, she probably had a lot of problems, and she was dating this married man. So this guy comes up at 3 in the morning. My brother was sound asleep, and he comes up with a samurai sword, and he literally hacks my brother to death. And they were in separate rooms. They weren't boyfriend or girlfriend. And literally it was unbelievable how horrible it was. She woke up screaming. She called the police, and he decided he was going to be in his car and just wait for the police because you know what he did? He thought they were having an affair. And I had to go to the police station the following day. I was like terrified because I didn't even know what he was going to look like. And so one of my former sister-in-law, she was so lovely. She goes, "Look, I'm going to drive you." I was still living on the Cape. We had to go all the way up past Lynn. There's a lot of murder that takes place there. And so I had to identify him, which I literally, when I walked into that police station, they looked at me because they looked at him when in the morgue. He goes, "You're not going to identify your brother." And then I got angry because I wanted to make sure it was my brother. And I was sobbing. And he goes, "You cannot see your brother." And I think in some ways that was a gift because if I remembered him to whatever I mean, I saw what was going on because I saw the transcript eventually of his murder. It was horrific. And my brother never stood a chance.
What are the issues that are unique to murder as a cause of death that you deal with, that you dealt with for yourself, and that you help the clients that request your services deal with?
Well, let me just tell you, I cried a lot over going through that with my brother, and I don't really think I mean, that's a hard question to answer. I mean, there's different modalities, but I think the grieving process stays within our system, and how we choose to navigate that makes a big difference, but it's not easy. And it's a hard question because I think people grieve differently. I still cry over my brother, and it's been years since he's passed. And I think we have to allow ourselves to be able to cry and also to be angry and to be sad and also find some joy in their lives. And it's not that easy, but it's a one day at a time kind of thing. I can't even give you specifics because everybody has a different way of healing and also crying. I mean, my brother's been gone, what? How long ago was it? He was 39. He would have been well in his 60s now. I still cry over him. And I think, I don't know, do we have any specific coping skills? I think a lot of people go into groups but with one difficulty with that is that a lot of times I used to run groups on death and dying, but it's not always the best because it's constantly, talked about of the same thing of how they were murdered. And I don't know how healthy it is either. And I think people have a different way of learning how to cope with things. And I don't think there is a yes or no on how to do it. You know.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things that I've always been concerned with is that the incident defines totally defines the life of the survivors that are left. And, my daughter's death was a big part of my experience, is a big part in the way that I've transformed my beliefs and priorities. But
Yeah.
there's other categories as well, too, that transcend me just being a father who lost a child. I mean, I'm a father, I'm a grandfather, I'm a great grandfather. And I'm reminded every day that those are other categories that I have to honor, because in doing so, and now that the best part of my daughter is integrated in the best parts of me, and honoring those other categories, I'm honoring her, and she's moving forward with me symbolically and literally, in the life that I continue to make for myself without her physical presence.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I mean, just what you shared, I sadly can relate to that, right? Going through the trauma of losing a child or losing a sibling. And I remember him coming to me 3 times, and it was always when I was sobbing. And he always showed up in his blue suit and he goes, "Cindy, I am fine. I'm fine. And I'll see you again." And every time he came, it was so moving because it took off the pain of dread and the sadness. But as I said earlier, I don't think we ever get over the loss. It's learning how to walk with it with grace. And it's hard. It's not easy for everybody, and especially a child. But people also forget that when you have a sibling, you're also in a very similar state of mind because you were so close to that sibling. And I just think death and dying is, part of the minute we are born, we are going to die at some point, right?
Mm.
And I feel that's the contract we take. I'm not sure if contracts are shorter or longer than most people, but after being on the other side, we always have the ability to change that trajectory on some level, of what is it going to look like as we get older. But yeah, I'm sure what you've gone through is very painful as well.
Well, and what you've gone through is very painful. I mean, I've told my students at Utica University in my death, dying, and bereavement class, you don't rate tragedy on a 1 to 10 scale. Everybody's tragedy is their tragedy, and you meet them at their worst. You meet them at their worst loss, whether it's the loss of a child, it's the loss of a pet, it's the loss of a sibling. That's where you go. Um, because it's important for us to be able to hold space and be companions to individuals' worst pain and allow the stories to unfold. And we can't do that if we're constantly grading whose loss is better than or more severe or whose grief is more important. All grief is important. All loss changes the landscape of who we are, changes our world, and we have to honor it.
Well, you're right. I totally agree with you. I have had so many dogs though, over the years. I'm a crazy animal lover. These dogs have been gone a long time. I still cry. And it's those things that are intermittent. It comes out of nowhere. I remember driving after we buried my brother. I think that was the hardest thing for my mother. And I was raised Jewish, and I don't even practice as much. I'm more spiritually minded with my everything that I believe in. But in the Jewish religion, it is mandatory that you bury that person the day after their death. And unfortunately, to do it because it was a police investigation. And that literally tore my mother up. But eventually, when we did bury him, and I remember standing there with my younger brother, myself, and my mom, it was just so sad, but I knew he was in a better place. I knew he was no longer in pain, and I can see it so vividly watching my brother and my mother help, and especially my mother, who was hysterical over this, but we never get over it. I just don't think we do. And it's the learning how to walk with it, as I always say. But I mean, some people have come up to me when I've gone on the circuit and spoken about death and dying. He goes, well, why did we choose it? And how do you answer that question, right? To somebody who has still dealing with a lot of grief. And how would you answer that question, Dave? And that's not an easy answer.
No, I mean, there's a human law explanation and there's a sacred law explanation. It took me about 7 years to understand the difference. So, that's a question I would just say, I will throw out those, what I see is from my perspective, as human law and sacred law explanation for what happened to me. But I also tell anybody that, look, this is my experience, not yours. I'm just planting this as food for thought. Down the road, you might say that, that Roberts guy had a point, but I'm not here to try to convince you. I'm here to plant seeds and share from my experience how I was able to come to that conclusion. What you do with that, the truth that you find with that is up to you.
Yeah, it is. And I guess I mean, how many years ago did your daughter pass away? How old was she, Dave?
But she was 18 and she passed away at over 23 years ago now.
My goodness.
So, I mean, there isn't anything about life, death, or life after death that I haven't explored. I'm a firm believer in signs of any kind, not just spirit visitations, but,
Yeah.
pennies from heaven, hearts and coffee cups, hearing a song on the radio that reminds you of your loved one when you're thinking of them. Their consciousness manifests and their energy manifests in many forms. So, which leads me to my next question. Let's say if anybody was really skeptical about the survival of consciousness and said, Cindy, now that's a bunch of bunk. How would you respond to that?
Well, I would be respectful to that person as usual. And I would say, well, and the last thing I would never say is, well, until you have that experience, you'll understand it, which I would never say. I think somebody has to be open to it. I think I would be very kind and just listen. And I would ask them, well, what makes you feel that it is sort of debunked? And that's how it would get started. But I think there's a fear of death in this culture. I think for many people, and I think that until somebody goes through that experience, they will have a better understanding of what happens. And I think that's how I would approach it, but from a very loving perspective. And because our culture, we've gotten somewhat better, but I feel the United States needs a lot more work on that with death and dying, and really talking about it and knowing that we're never really alone. But there are many people who think it's crazy and it's never going to happen. And I always say to myself, well, when they go to the other side, they're going to realize that there's a lot more here than what you thought, right? It's not necessarily what I would say to that person. But I've held a lot of groups on that, and there's been a lot of conversation with that, and I give them the grace to believe what they want to believe at that point.
Yeah, that's all we can do. And that's what I do as well, too. I just tell individuals, here's my experience. I'm not here to convince you that my experience is the way to go, or you have to see it my way. It's just, here it is. You make whatever sense out of it that you wish. And if you align with it, that's great. If you don't, that's okay too. But maybe down the road, the perspective may change. But it's not about trying to force my reality on anybody else. As a therapist, a former therapist, if I tried to do that, that's an ethical violation, because I'm taking away an individual's right to self-determine what they believe is real, what type of treatment that they need, or what perspectives that they're willing to embrace.
And I'm very much the same way being a therapist. Listen and I do it with generosity. And we can't really have an opinion whether we agree or not. And I think it's just a matter of a journey, right? And I would never want anybody to lose somebody. And we all are going to die one day. We just don't know when, right? Some people do. My brother knew he was going to die young. I don't think he ever knew he was going to die the way he died, though. And I'm sure your beautiful daughter was not expecting this either, but yet we all take contracts, right? And that's what's really hard. I'm not sure I would necessarily say that I have talked about that, but I'm careful on how I present that because loss is loss. And I don't care what anybody says. We never get over it. It's learning how to walk with it with grace. And that's not easy.
And it's also knowing, I think, as a therapist, when an individual is ready for different perspectives based on where they are in their grief. Because I've always said, to my students is that what they may be not ready to hear at one level, one phase of their grief, they may be ready to hear at another phase of their grief. And always be mindful of language, be mindful of how they conceptualize death. And if they're saying that my loved one passed away, that's the language that you use. You try to help them come to the reality of death using the language that they're comfortable with, and then gradually introduce other perspectives as you've established a relationship. How much does listening and being a companion in to a person's journey, how much of that drives what you do as a therapist?
I mean, I'm very good at listening. I tend to listen more than talking, but then when they ask me questions, I will respond. So I think listening is very imperative to understanding that person or what they've gone through. And again, we all take different paths, right? And death and dying is part of the minute we're born, we're going to die. And most of us know that as we get older, and we can only hope that we live a really full, healthy life. But yeah, I mean, I think that it's just, I'm very open and honest with it. I listen to my, clients and young people who have also lost siblings or parents. And I just support them, just support them positively, no matter what they believe in. And I think, once again, I think our country is getting a little better with death and dying, but we need so much more. I mean, I'll give you a quick story. My son-in-law, who is from Bulgaria, immigrated here many years ago, and he's married to my oldest daughter. They have a wonderful marriage. They live outside of Boston, and his parents lived in like 15 flights of stairs of this old building, right, in Bulgaria, and they would have to walk up every single day, and they used to talk about what happens if their parents die, right? How are they gonna get them up there? But the whole purpose of that is that they ritualize. They will take that elderly person in who is ill, and they will have them stay with them until they die. And I'm not saying that's always the best way, but in that culture, it really woke me up in a lot of ways. They will take care of their loved ones no matter what, no matter what condition they're in. And I think we're getting there. I do believe there are a lot of families who will take their loved ones in, but I think we are missing something in the United States. Death is the minute we're born, we're going to have to die at some point. But I think if there was more ability to have more talks about this, people would not be afraid. For me, it's what's missing. That's why I go around and speak on this. But in Bulgaria, it's a whole different ballgame. They take their loved ones in, and that's just what they do. And I'm not so sure that's can be right for everybody. They can't always do it right here. They don't see their family as much anymore,
Yeah, I mean, we live in a society in America, our families are pretty much spread all over the country. They're in different geographic locations, which makes that kind of living under one roof very challenging. And the only way that occurs is if it's out of necessity, but in other cultures, I believe India is another culture that, or, they won't even consider skilled nursing facility until I think it's the responsibility, I believe, and I may be wrong with this, of the oldest son,
Yes.
their family to move into the house or to make sure that their parents are living as independently as they can until they can't anymore. In this country, we're very quick to put our loved ones in a nursing home at the first sign of a loss of autonomy. And I'm not sure that's the best option for everybody.
Well, it's interesting you say that because I remember this so vividly, and it's almost ironic that you said that. I was an exchange student to India many years ago in high school. I was there for like 6 months, and I lived with a host family who was considered very wealthy. But if you were to go into their home, we would eat on the floor. It was very simple, right? But to them, they were the highest of the range in terms of their religion and whatnot, and that everybody lived in that household together. Even the mother who was not doing well, she was dying, and I had a separate room, and I had a room, and I shared it with one of them, my sisters at that time. We would call her a sister because I became that to her. It really changed everything in my life and how much they really, really took care of their loved ones because they could. And I'm not saying everybody can do that. Some people don't have the money to be able to do that or put them in nursing homes or whatever the case may be. But it was very moving for me to see that. And I still think we need to clean that up a little bit here in the United States.
I agree. I agree. Cindy, you have left us with so much good stuff today. But I got a couple, you have. And I got a couple more questions for you before we conclude today. The first is if you're going to leave our audience with one ultimate takeaway, one ultimate nugget of wisdom, what would that be?
I would say live your life with such a zest, no matter what you're going. Don't be afraid to step forward and do the things you want to do because life is very short. And it's really important to embrace loving and being kind to yourself and doing the things that are really important to you.
Yeah, I like that first statement you made, regardless of what you're going through, just make sure that you live life to the fullest. I like that. Cindy, my last question for you. This will give you an opportunity to do a little self-promotion. If individuals want to find out about your services, purchase your book, what's the best way for them to do that?
You can look me up at cindybarg.com, but also I'm going to give you my email. Is that okay? You have it, cebarg11@gmail.com. They can easily get in touch with me with that as well.
I can attest when I've emailed you, you've responded right away. So,
Yeah.
and I will make sure all of your contact information gets into the episode notes before we go live. So, Cindy, thank you so much for spending a Sunday morning and sharing coffee with me. I enjoyed our conversation. I hope we can do this again sometime.
So my pleasure, and have a wonderful day, Dave. And again, thank you so much.
My pleasure, Cindy. And with that, that's a wrap on another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, wishing you peace.